Hello and welcome back to this House of Walls. I am so happy to be here and share the books that I read in January. So I finished 7 books, and then I did have a read aloud that my kids and I finished together. I'm not really going to talk about that in this video. I'm thinking I might do a separate video about read alouds that we do and how we do them and things like that. So books I'm talking about today are just books that I read by myself. The first book is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a warm, cozy fantasy following Viv, who decides to open a coffee shop in a world that doesn't know coffee. I absolutely loved this book. Total 5 stars. I cannot wait to read more by this author and kind of see if we continue with this world. My next book for January was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This was my first book by this author. If you saw my January TBR, this was a book that my mom gave me in December of 2019, so I started reading this at the beginning of 2020, and I had to set it down. But reading it now, after a different pandemic, but a pandemic, I liked it. I did really like it. I enjoyed the story. It doesn't deal totally with the fallout right after the pandemic and end of civilization as we know it, but it also jumps 20 years ahead and shows what life is like then and follows a group of traveling singers and musicians and actors as they travel around to different communities. So I did really like it, and I want to read more by this author. Next I have The Attic Child by Lola J. This was a book of the month that I was catching up on, so this came out in September of 2022. I am really happy that I got to this month. It was a beautifully well-written story with dual timelines of children being horribly mistreated in different ways in different times. So the first child you follow is Celestine, who is taken from Africa and brought to England. You can imagine he at first is very much so paraded around, but then things happen and he is then horribly mistreated, which he was the whole time. Just at least in the beginning, there was the show of, oh, but everything's fine. No, it wasn't. And then you follow Laura, who is the later timeline, as she is very much so abused by her stepmother. I really enjoyed this book. I'm very happy that I read it, and I encourage everybody to read it. My next book is The Measure by Nikki Erlich. This was my in-person book club pick. I am actually hosting it tomorrow as I film this. I'm interested to see what other people in my book club think about this book. So if you don't know, this is a contemporary slight fantasy book where everybody wakes up one morning, and if you're over the age 22 or older, you have a box on your front door. Everybody in the entire world. And it has a string in it, and that string, they find out, determines how long your life is going to be. So you can imagine things go down. I enjoyed the initial plot of this story and was very fascinated with how this was going to affect all these different people that we were following. What I didn't really love about the book is the modern day politics that comes into play. A lot of times I read books to escape modern day issues, and so this definitely had realistic modern day politics involved in this story, and it was interesting to see how this author portrayed how politics would come into a situation like this. I gave it 3.5 stars because I think that just kind of ruined it for me. That's just my own personal, I want to escape actual modern day issues. But it was good, and I'm glad that we read it for our in-person book club. So after that book, I needed a big-time fantasy. So I pulled some fantasy books off of my shelf, read the back to my husband, and asked him to pick one. So I started the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and this is the first in the Broken Earth trilogy. I absolutely loved this book. It has beautiful world building, so unlike our world. It was amazing. So this follows 3 different aged women who are all in some form or another basically like earth movers. So they can move earth on a whim. And you see the play in a very different government, but you can understand how that government would be, and how the government has control over these earth movers. I thought it was fantastic. I am so excited to pick up book 2 and 3 in this trilogy and see what else happens in this world. My next book is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden, and this is the first, it is a trilogy. I don't know what the name of the trilogy is. I, again, loved this book. It is a historical fantasy, in the sense that it takes place in Russia, where Christianity is coming into play, but people still believe very much so in the old world religion, the people and spirits that you leave gifts for, and they help to protect your house or your barn or your crops or anything like that. It was a beautifully written book. I cannot wait to continue with this series and see what happens next. My last book that I finished in January was Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I don't know how I feel about this book. I have not rated it yet. I think I need to sit on it a little bit longer and see how I feel about it. I'm glad that this is not my first Fredrik Backman. Let me say that. I have read A Man Called Ove and Anxious People. And I know that Fredrik Backman tends to kind of have like a dry sense of humor with his writing. I didn't get that with this. This is much more serious, with serious things following a hockey town. And there's a fallout that happens. And it's just dealing with a lot of toxic masculinity. You know, he's writing it in the sense of, this is gross how they're acting. I don't know. I liked it, but I don't know how to feel about it. I am interested to see how it continues. This is the first in a trilogy. I will pick up the second one and continue on. I'm interested to see where this town goes and what happens with some of the people in this town. Yeah. Alright, so that was my books for January. I'll hold them all up. There you are. Overall, it was a fantastic reading month, and I am so excited to see what February brings for reading, and to continue some of these series and just read more.